when we speak about holiness, what is the meaning of Kadusha? Kadusha means something that's set off at a level which nothing else has relevance to that level, whatever that may be, in the positive and negative. Something which is the most, I don't use the word extreme, the most distant from anything in existence, in the most positive, purest context. That's called Kadusha. The Torah refers to a prostitute as a Kadesha, because her behavior is so not acceptable within societal values. She's extremely separated from society due to what? The way she lives her life. So Kadusha means set off on a plateau or at a level unto itself. In the third blessing of the Amidah, we say, Ato Kadosh, V'shimcha Kadosh. You're holy, your name is holy, Ukadoshim Chol Yomei Haluchaselo. And those who praise you every day are also holy. What is God being holy? Kadosh means he's on a plane unto himself. God is infinite. God is not fathomable, even by, as I mentioned, finite cannot fathom infinite. Ato Kadosh. The names of God are what? Every name of God has a certain connotation, but those names have relevance to the way God relates to this existence. As we said, Yud Kei Vav Kei. He was, is, and he will be, which signifies and connotes his being infinite. He's the master, but it also connotes the attribute of mercy. The concept of mercy only has relevance to existence. Of course, there's an existence, there are people who have liability, culpability. There's what to talk about, there's mercy. If there's no existence, there's nothing. Mercy has no relevance to anything. Judgment. What are you judging? Because there is an existence, we talk about the attribute of judgment. The concept of awesomeness, which is rachmim, mercy. Also, mercy is within the context of human behavior. If there's no human being, if there would be no intelligent creatures, and nobody's subject to justice, there's no mercy. Either God wills the world or he doesn't will the world. It's not you have mercy. If there's a person who has liability, have mercy on you, I let you continue despite your shortcomings, despite the basis for prosecution. That's mercy. I'm willing to give you many more chances, to make corrections, to maximize on opportunity. Because if God takes the person's life sooner, he cannot do more in the future. But if God is patient with the person, even though eventually he rains in on him, but hopefully he'll do many good things in that interim period, that God extends his life or gives him ability to do many things, presents opportunities to that person. So when we speak about God being holy, or the appellations of God's name, that every name has relevance to existence. So it doesn't really describe who God is, because God is indescribable. You can't identify infinite. We can't identify even what an angel is, because an angel is a spiritual being. We have no relevance to understand what the spiritual realm is, because we don't live within the spiritual realm. We understand the angels, we understand what spiritual is, but in reality, we have no understanding of what that is. But even the angel has no understanding what God is. All they know, he's master. That's it. He's the master of everything. He willed everything. So the two understandings of Kadusha. Kadusha means, or he's that omnipotent one. That has to do with our existence. And it also has to do with who he is in his essence. In his essence, he's Kadosh, whatever that means. Set off at a level unfathomable by anybody, by any creation. That means the only one who knows who he is himself. Nobody knows who he is other than himself. Then this Kadusha, then we behave a certain way, he has relevance to this existence. Anything he has relevance to, and you have relevance and you could attach yourself to that, you assume a level which is also set off, because everything else is purely physical, and this person assumes a spiritual persona, which is other than anything in existence. Therefore, it's also, that's called Kadusha. It's Kadosh. It's set off. So the word Kadusha is in two contexts. In the reality of what it is, which is the source we cannot fathom what that is, because that's God himself. But could God be Kadosh relevant to us? That we could relate to. And God tells us how to relate to it within justice, within indiscriminate kindness, within mercy, one of a kind. Now, there's an expression in the vernacular, tough love. It's only because I love you, therefore I'm raining it on you. Of course, if I let you cut you loose, although you may be doing what you want to do, but you're going into a state of self-destruction. So God has to rein in that the person shouldn't destroy himself. So sometimes God has to clip a person's wings to prevent certain other things from happening. But it doesn't make sense. I'll give you an example. You have a rich man, you have a poor man. The poor man says, I prefer to be rich than poor. Why do you prefer to be rich than poor? Well, the rich man has his challenges. The poor man has his challenges. What's the challenges of the rich man? Because he's wealthy, he could be arrogant, he can be pompous, and he can believe he's the closest thing to God due to his degree of wealth. And he can believe that all my success is I'm a self-made man. And he doesn't want to acknowledge that it was endowed by God. But those are the parameters of his choice. How does he see it? Is he endowed by God? And he has a mission to utilize that wealth. What does he know? I created that wealth. It's to live high on the hog, to live life to its fullest. And therefore it breeds arrogance and all negative characteristics within the person. The poor man says, something? I prefer to be wealthy than poor. Because when you're poor, you don't have much. Although you're humble, but something? I prefer to be challenged than be humble. Be humbled by being impoverished. But you have another thing. The poor man may have problems to the degree he says, where's God? Here I'm trying to be a devout Jew. Where is God? So he has another level of challenge. So the challenges of a rich man and the challenge of a poor man are different kinds of challenges. So the poor man says, I like to switch places with the rich man. And the rich man says, I have so many problems with the IRS and with this and with that. No, I prefer to be under the radar. It's not worth it. So each one wants to switch and live a different role. So why does God choose the rich man to be the rich man, the poor man to be the poor man? We had said that no two souls that are exactly alike. Each soul, its challenges in life are tailor-made to the spiritual makeup of that soul to achieve perfection within that soul. So because of the profile of the rich man's soul, he needs the challenges of a rich man to be able to perfect that soul. And the poor man, due to the makeup of his soul, he needs another kind of challenge. So the question is why? You know what the answer is? Only God knows. Only God knows why the profile of one soul is one profile, the other one's another profile. Each one needs something else. Person has genetically certain medical issues, diabetes. Person has to be careful, has to restrict himself, has to go on to medication. Person doesn't have it within his genome, doesn't need all that. As long as he doesn't abuse himself, eating way, behavior way, he'll be healthy. But there are other issues. He has cardiac issues, which are part of his genetic profile. The other person doesn't have cardiac issues. But why? Why does he have this? You know what the answer is? Only God knows. Only God knows. We don't know why. But it has to do with the spiritual profile of the person who needs that condition to deal with it. Despite everything, you have to walk that straight line. And you can't get distracted. Despite that. But why? Same answer, only God knows. Why is one person meant to live 80 years, another person meant to live 100 years? The man says 80, I prefer to live 100. You'd say, you could prefer what you want, but God makes that decision. But what determines the level of longevity? A person could cut his years short. But maximize, you get the maximum, which was designated to you. Why? So we've mentioned many times, if a person has a mission in life and he must achieve a certain level of perfection, God has to give you the amount of years that you're able to achieve it. If he gives you 60 years and you need 80 years to achieve that level of perfection, it's an impossibility. So he has to give you enough years to be able to address what you're meant to be, what you're meant to achieve. The person less years, he may have less years either because he cut his life short, or because he doesn't need more than 60 years to achieve whatever he has to achieve at his level of perfection. That's the reason why, nothing more than that. You have children who die as children. They have no liability, no culpability. But you realize, when God forbid a child becomes sick and dies, it's a challenge for the parents. When the child is sick, and when the child, God forbid, dies, again, it's a challenge for the parents. How do they process that? What about the intermediate family? What about the extended family? What about society? What do they have to say? He's an innocent child. Why did God do that? You know why? Maybe without coming on to the concept of reincarnation. Of course, the child is born from a previous life, and he has to atone for certain things. Without that, the Gemara tells us that if a child lives to the point he's able to say Amen on a blessing, that's sufficient that he have a share in the world to come. That was his purpose. He should come to just answer Amen. Sometimes a person has a purpose that people should ask questions, to create a challenge for others. And if they have the right answer, that's the value of that child's life. Because you have to create a context of choice that people should have questions. And if, despite the question and the seriousness of that question, if you come up with the right answer, then you're doing great. So that child was the basis for the person to ask the question and see it correctly. Very often the answer is, I don't know, but that's the will of God. And that's probably the right answer. Why that child came into existence and suffered, and that, because the more he suffers, the more a question you have. And despite that question, you still remain that fervent believer. Of course, you submit to God's will and say, that's God. We don't know God's mind. That's exactly what you're supposed to say. Because the things, there is no understanding. Within the human context, you can't understand it. Unless you go the reincarnation route. The person that existed, lived previously, and he's come pay back debt. The famous question, Tzaddik v'ralo, Rosha v'tovlo. The tzaddik who suffers and the evil person who thrives and succeeds in life. Or you find Russia, evil person suffers, and the tzaddik has it good. So what does that seemingly say? What's the takeaway? The takeaway is there's no rhyme or reason for life. You can be devout, and a person can have a disastrous life. You can be evil, and he can also have a disastrous life. So you see, seemingly, there's no linkage between the way you serve God, whether your life is disastrous or your life is outstandingly positive. Because you have Rasha v'tovlo, you have Tzaddik v'tovlo. The Rasha has it good, the evil, and the Tzaddik has it good. And you have the other side of the equation. They both have it terrible. And then you have Tzaddik v'tovlo, Rasha v'ralo. You say, that makes sense. The Tzaddik is now the goodness, good fortune, and the Rasha has disastrous fortune. That makes sense. But anything other than that creates a level of ambiguity, a level of confusion. You say, no rhyme or reason. So why? We'll never figure out why on an individual basis, but conceptually, why it could exist, and it does exist, that we could understand, as we're going to discuss. The actual application of that you have to know the spiritual makeup of the person's soul. Why each person needs another level of challenge. Two types of tzaddikim. You need this challenge to perfect your soul. And to be that tzaddik, the other person needs another situation to perfect that soul. Therefore, it's ralo. Therefore, he doesn't have a good day in his life. It was known, Ibn Ezra, who lived in Egypt, was a contemporary of Rambam, Maimonides. And he has a commentary on the Torah, Ibn Ezra. And Ibn Ezra writes, and he had very bad fortune. He wasn't well, he was impoverished. And he used to say that if he would go into the umbrella business, God will cause it should never rain. And if he would go into the hat business, people would be born without heads. That's his fortune. That's what he said about himself. He was really at the extreme level of tzaddik v'ralo. He didn't have a good day. Other than his Torah study, didn't have it. Other tzaddikim, totally different. Families, wealth, comfort, whatever it is. Why? The bottom answer is only God knows. But factually, that challenge that Ibn Ezra had to whatever his soul was, which was a great soul, because he was from the early commentators, he was a colleague, a contemporary of Rambam, he needed that state of being, that predicament, to meet challenges at this very advanced level to be able to perfect his soul. That's what Ibn Ezra was. That's Tzaddik V'Ralo. Tzaddik V'Todlo, he has another mission. His mission is to be out there, to be an influencer, and he needs that charisma, he needs that intellect, he needs that trappings of wealth to be able to be appreciated and recognized by society, even by secular society. I'll give you an example. Paul Reichman was a very devout Jew, very devout. And he was learned. He was a real Talmud Chacham. But I guarantee you, when Paul Reichman walked into a room of businessmen, understanding what he gave in a year for charity, they didn't earn it 15, 20 years, even if he's doing well, they understood he's a man who's deserving of respect. That they understood without a question. But it doesn't make sense to you do all these other things. Because you recognize his success in material, the question is not a question. Evidently, he must be doing the right thing. Because you see to what degree he succeeded in business. So that is a Kiddush Hashem. He's going to give many approaches and theories why tzaddik is ralo and rosh v'tovlo. The Talmud tells us, "B'nei bonav shel Haman arosha, lo mentor b'nei brach." The grandchildren of Haman, wanted to annihilate every man, woman, and children. His grandchildren converted to Judaism, and they studied Torah in Bnei Brak. Reb Meir, who was one of the leading Torah sages, time of the top Mishnah, he was the grandson. He was from the Roman family. He was Nero's nephew. Nero was a Roman emperor. He was his nephew. Rabbi Akiva came from converts. And he was the greatest Torah sage in his time, Rabbi Akiva. Does it make sense? You think a person who comes from more pure pedigree, he would be the equivalent of Rabbi Akiva. No. Rabbi Akiva, despite being a convert, he personally, but coming from converts, his father wasn't a convert either. But he came from converts. He was this outstanding Torah sage. He was the most primary of the 10 martyrs who were killed by the Romans. Okay, we're going to stop here.